Okay, so we're officially starting. And of course, two parts to this. Modular 1 talks about the American legal system, and part 2 talks about governance, particularly board governance. Two kinds of issues that you have to understand in order to grasp the other kinds of things that we're going to be getting involved in through this course. Feel free to get your notes out because I'm going to be asking you some specifics and would like for you to share your learnings at this particular point, and then we can kind of go from there. So the very first objective is we want you to be able to determine the different sources of the law and distinguish between them. Angela, can you give me one of the sources?
I mean, obviously we have the legal system, which is the court system. So you have the local,
Okay, you can stop right there. You hit the one major source is case law. And case law or judge law, those are laws where people have needed an interpretation of one of the other sources. Carissa, can you give me another one of the sources?
Statutes.
Yes, statutes. And of course, statutes derive from two distinct bodies. The first body is going to be the Congress, U.S. Congress, and the second body would be Michigan's General Assembly. So we can have statutes coming from both of those items. Okay, Nawal, can you give me a third one?
I'm here. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, feel free to follow along with your notes. I really want you to do that.
That's what I'm trying to find, to be honest. That's
Okay.
why, but I'm looking for them.
Okay. We have two other sources that we want you to be aware of.
I'm still looking for them. One
Okay.
second.
Hello, Lenise.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Ezra, did you make it in? I'll take that as a maybe. Well, the third source is administrative law. And this one is a little bit of one that people don't necessarily think about. But for example, the U.S. Department of Education determines specifics of laws that are passed by Congress. And an example of this would be, of course, Every Student Succeeds Act. That is a law that was passed by Congress. And they hand it over to the Department of Education. Then the Department of Education devises ways in which that law is going to be implemented. And this would be true of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It would be true of all those kinds of areas. And also there's administrative law at the state level as well. The one I always like to talk about is the athletic codes, meaning the Michigan Association of Athletics. Not sure what that's called, but it's probably something like that, the state level athletics. And so there might be a state law that's passed with regard to grade point averages, and it might be very general and say that there will be a grade point average for students before they can participate. And then the Michigan Athletic Code could spell out more specifics, and even it could go further, and boards of education could even define it even more deeply. The one thing that we always want to realize that when you have a statutory law, you can't have a administrative law that would supersede the statutory law. You can't have a board policy that supersedes the Michigan law. So there's three of them. The last one would be constitutional law. And this derives, of course, from the Constitution. which is the basic law of our land. And of course, within that Constitution, we have a variety of amendments. And that's what we're going to get into next. And the next objective is for us to identify the federal constitutional provisions affecting education, including the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment. And I'll start you out. And here we're talking, there's nothing spelled out in the Constitution about providing education. However, there are those laws that guide us. Where the specifics come into case is the First Amendment. What does that First Amendment refer to? What are we talking about when we talk about the First Amendment? Ezra, are you with me?
Are you talking about like the freedom of speech?
Yes, freedom of speech and freedom of expression. What you're going to find is that as we get into the rights of teachers, that there have been interpretations of the freedom of speech. And what you're going to find is there is one interpretation where the individual was granted freedom of speech because it was a public concern. There was another example following that one where their speech was restricted because it was a private concern. So there's one example. You'll also find the same thing's going to happen with students when we get into the student portion. You get into the Fourth Amendment. Who can tell me what the Fourth Amendment is about in general?
The Fourth Amendment protects people from unreasonable search and seizure.
Bingo. Exactly. And so, once again, there's going to be some questions, some cases that is going to come up with regard to students and staff as to what's reasonable. In the meantime, it was defined that for schools, you do not, for we citizens, there has to be a purpose, a warrant, so to speak, that's provided in order for people to search our possessions. For staff and students, there's been some interpretation of that, and the standard is not the same. We get into the fifth. The fifth is a little bit less of an impact, but if we found ourselves deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process, then we would have a situation where we could rely on the Fifth Amendment. And once again, there'll be situations where students will be concerned about and staff will be concerned about their due process. And you'll learn about a major case with staff member regarding that. The 10th Amendment, a very important amendment for education. Can anybody tell me what the 10th Amendment was in general?
Didn't it say that education was a focus of the state level?
Bingo. Yes. The 10th Amendment delegate said anything that's not contained here in the U.S. Constitution, nor the amendments, those powers are reserved to the states. So, for example, you think about driver's licenses. There's no federal driving license. You have a state driver's license. So that power is reserved to the state. Education issues are reserved to the state. So when we start talking about the certifications, state certifications, not federal certifications. When we talk about testing, we're talking about state decisions. We go back up to the administrative law and every Student Succeeds Act, that in general said schools will test for accountability. But this particular law gave leeway to the states to make decisions about what grade levels, what tests are going to use, and those kinds of things. So the 10th Amendment is huge as far as education is concerned. The 14th Amendment. Anybody with the 14th Amendment?
It has to do with citizenship, I think.
That,
Goes a little-
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
American civil rights.
Okay, goes a little bit deeper than that. Ezra, can you help us?
Yeah, due process and equal protection.
Bingo. Due process and equal protection. It provides citizens, you were right about that, but what it particularly provided them was no state shall deprive any persons of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Those became very important later with civil rights. So you were correct about that. So basically, those are the constitutional provisions that affect education, and ones that we're going to be referring to, particularly when we talked about staff rights, when we talk about student rights. And there have been cases that have ferreted out and interpreted more clearly those amendments. The third objective is to describe the levels, functions, and jurisdictional powers of the federal court system and state court system, and including the jurisdiction in which to file a suit. So what's the highest court of the land? What's the highest court of our land?
The Supreme Court.
U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes.
When I talk about the U.S. Supreme Court, and you guys are too young to remember this, you maybe read about this in your history books, but I like to discuss the Bush-Gore election because it clearly showed how powerful the U.S. Supreme Court was. In that particular election, if you will recall, Florida had some issues in counting ballots, and they could not arrive at their electoral votes, which candidate was going to go with Bush or Gore. And so what happened is there was it would start at the lowest Florida court. It would go to the Florida Supreme Court, and it would go to the U.S. Supreme Court. It went pretty fast because I think it took us a month to figure out who actually was the president. And so ultimately what happened was the U.S. Supreme Court had to walk through those hanging chads and whether to count them or not count them. And finally, the U.S. Supreme Court says, you figure it out, and you must tell us who the electoral votes go toward. And that's how it finally was decided. So it really showed the power of the U.S. Supreme Court. Of course, in the United States, we have a three-part system. And when I say three-part system, what do I mean by that?
The three branches of our government, the legislative, executive, and judicial.
Well, okay. I'm talking right now. We're talking about court system.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. You're talking about the three branches of government, of course, which are the legislative branch, executive branch, and the judicial branch. But right now, we're just into the three-part court system.
Oh,
Like the
then
steps that are taken,
I'm sorry,
the steps that are taken in trial,
not yet. What I want to do is I want to
You mean the trial court, the Court of Appeals, and then the Supreme Court?
Yes. So we have a three-part. The U.S. system is a three-part system. Starts with a U.S. trial court, and what students typically don't realize is that is where the case starts, and there could be a trial there with all the evidence shown and all the information and a decision made. Well, if one party or the other doesn't like the decision, they can appeal that to the U.S. Appeals Court or Circuit Court. And I think there are 13 appellate courts across the United States. There's I'm not sure exactly how many US district courts, but every state has 2 or 3 district courts. When I talk about the appellate courts, I like to, and jurisdiction, I like to talk about the Elk Grove Unified School District versus Newdow case. Another case that you probably have not heard of, but when I share it with you, you're going to see why this is such a landmark case, okay? So in 2004, that's when the ruling came about. It all started in a California district trial court. And a gentleman by the name of Newdow was questioning whether his daughter had to recite the Pledge of Allegiance because he was an atheist. And of course, the Pledge of Allegiance says under God. Now, here's what you probably don't know. The U.S. District Court in California, I think that's the ninth, yes, the ninth court, they decided that Newdow was correct, that his daughter should not have to recite the pledge. Well, the U.S. government appealed that to the appeals court, and lo and behold, the appeals court also upheld it. Now, I want to talk about jurisdiction. So when the district court said you don't have to say the pledge, it was only in those school districts of which that district was held, okay? Now, the Ninth District Court, I think, spans from Washington, Oregon, and California. So when the Ninth Circuit said, yes, you do not have to recite the pledge, all of the children in those 3 states shouldn't recite the pledge. The US Supreme Court couldn't wait to get a hold of this particular case for a variety of reasons. And the US District Court in 2004 ruled that the individual who brought this case to bear was not this girl's custodial parent. He had no custodial rights. It was his daughter, but due to custody concerns, he was not the legal custodian. Therefore, he had what is called, he had no standing to bring forth the case. Now, the one thing I didn't share with you, and important I want to mention, is that the trial court listens to all the evidence and listens to witnesses and et cetera, et cetera. The appeals courts are looking as to whether there was an error in the process, the judicial process. And if there's no error in the judicial process, they will typically rule in favor of the district court. The Supreme Court, though, has the authority to listen to testimony, to talk to individuals, question, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what's important. Now, understand that here we are talking about civil cases. It's only civil cases that go through this process, okay? Not criminal cases. Criminal cases are held at the state level, although the crime is against the state, okay? Now, let's go to the state level in Michigan. You too have, like most states, there are about 4 or 5 that don't, but most states have a 3-part system, just like our federal. You have a trial court, you have and that is a district court. And what I found interesting as in my research, and this is different than Ohio, I'm from Ohio, district courts handle civil litigation under $25,000, excluding equity and small claims cases under $3,000. The circuit court, which is the other trial court, handle felony criminal cases and civil cases with claims of more than $25,000. So on average, most of the cases we're going to be maybe talking about there in Michigan will probably be starting with the circuit court. And of course, you do have an appellate court and you have a Supreme Court. So all the same with that. Now, the next thing I need you to understand is jurisdiction. So if I feel that my free speech right has been violated, I should be guided toward a U.S. district court because that is a violation of federal law. On the other hand, if we are questioning, if there's a question about teaching certification, that would be held at the state level, not the federal level. And so there are some nuances to this that I don't care that you know about, but on average, that's what you need to realize, that cases that are a violation of state law go through the state system. And of course, it can go all the way up to the U.S. or to the Michigan Supreme Court, and then it could go to the U.S. Supreme Court if the U.S. Supreme Court chooses to accept the case. Okay, which they don't have to. They can say, no, we're not going to accept the case. So very important to understand the jurisdiction, to understand just the system. Okay, the next objective, and I'm going to bet that you're going to know this one. Recognize the differences between a criminal case and a civil case. Lanice, what's the differences between a criminal case and a civil case?
Did you call my name?
Yes.
Okay, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what's the difference between a criminal case and a civil case?
Mm.
That's a softball question.
Okay, I did used to play softball, but apparently, okay, criminal and civil.
Well, first of all, what would be a criminal case?
Oh, like, murder, robbing,
Yes,
something that can cause like somebody harm.
crimes like that. So
Yes.
that's criminal. Okay. Now, so then what would be a civil case, do you think?
Oh, like something that's like involving like maybe like an organization or a dispute between like two people, something
Bingo.
they're
You
not telling the
said it.
truth. Okay.
Civil cases are typically between two parties. One party feels that the other party violated them in some way. Now, once again, if that person feels that they've been violated on a federal level, then their attorney should be filing that in the U.S. District Court. On the other hand, if they feel that it's been a violation of a state law, then it would be filed in the state courts. So criminal versus civil. We're going to be dealing with civil cases where one party is bringing a suit against another party. In some cases, it's two individuals. In other cases, it's an individual versus a school district. And so you'll see that throughout. Okay. So let's talk about the phases of a civil trial. What are the steps in the civil trial? This is where we go a little bit deeper than maybe your civics class, maybe.
They start with a pre-trial first?
I'm sorry?
Starting with a pre-trial first?
Yes. Well, and within that pre-trial, there has been a complaint charged. The individual who feels aggrieved files a complaint. And yes, that's all pre-trial. That would be a complaint. Okay. And so after that complaint has been filed, we get into the second stage.
The response?
Yes. And what that is an initial pleading. In other words, now the defendant, so you want to hear a couple of words, the plaintiff and the defendant. So now the defendant has the opportunity to say, I didn't do that, or yeah, I did it. Let's settle this. Let's settle it without going to trial. And many times that's what happens. The settlement occurs, and there's no particular trial. So then we get into the third phase. Anyone know it? And this is a little bit more detailed stuff, so I don't expect you to particularly overwhelming.
Is the third phase the discovery stage?
Yes, and this is what you need to understand is both sides have got to provide the evidence that they have. And you probably have all seen enough court shows where somebody will say, well, you didn't tell us this in advance. And the person will say, well, we just found out yesterday, and so we didn't have a chance to share it with you. But in general, the discovery phase is the part of that. We still are in the pre-trial phase. After all this occurs, then of course there's jury selection if there's going to be a jury court or a jury trial. Sometimes it's not a jury trial, just a court trial or a judge trial, but there's then the trial. And of course there you have all the evidence, and you've seen enough of those shows to know how it works. And ultimately there's going to be a decision, okay, either by the jury or perhaps by the judge, or if it's a case of the appeals court, it will be a group of judges. The same thing with the Supreme Court. It'll be a group of judges that will provide their opinions and decide what it is. Now, here's the important part of this whole thing is what's the proof of whether you're guilty or not in a civil trial?
Is that when the
Well, it's called the preponderance of evidence. In other words, there's enough evidence that shows that wrong was committed, or there's enough evidence that shows that there was not a wrong committed. Now, this is significantly different than a criminal trial. Within a criminal trial, the proof of burden, first of all, rests with the state, and it has to be without a shadow of a doubt. And you guys are way too young to know about the O.J. Simpson trial. Now, maybe some of you heard about it, but this one was pretty unique because he was found not guilty in a criminal court. There was not enough evidence. It was not without a shadow of a doubt. At least the jury felt there was not enough evidence. And I remember the glove, that was the big deal. Okay. However, he lost a bunch of money in civil trials against the two families of the individuals that were killed. So those are parts of that. So the next thing I want you to understand is I want you to understand the citations, okay? And I want to show you, I have the whiteboard here, and I want to show these to you. And I don't expect you to know these, okay? But I want you to at least be able to recognize when you see them, okay? The first thing you're going to see here is under federal law. When a federal law is passed, it gets recorded. And what you're going to see there is you're going to see the title, and you're going to see CFR. That stands for Code of Federal Regulations or Law. And then you'll see the little design there. It means sections. And then the number is the sections that's listed there. And then if there's a paragraph that's listed as well. So, for example, the American with Disabilities Act in 1990, that's 29 CFR Part 1630. So the next thing we get into is we get into the U.S. Supreme Court. I haven't used this too much, so I'm not as proficient. So with the U.S. Supreme Court, there we go, drag it over. The U.S. Supreme Court, you will see, here's Reno versus American Liberties Union, and you'll see once again, the volume, you'll see the recorder. And there's 2 or 3 different types of recorders. In this case, you see US. That means US Supreme Court. And then you see the page number, and that's the way it is cited. That's the specific code or citation. And so if a person was looking this up, that they could look it up using that process. As opposed to the next one here, is the U.S. Court of Appeals. And you'll see a similar process, but different. And here you're going to see, in this case, I think it's Kate Lyle versus Penn National Gaming Incorporated. And the plaintiff is always listed first. The defendant is always listed second. What's interesting is when you go through the Newdow case started out Newdow versus the United States of America. He won. So at the appellate court, it was also listed as Newdow versus the U.S. Department of Education. After the case was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, it got flipped, and it was the other way around. So in a U.S. Court of Appeals, you'll see once again the case name, you'll see the volume number, you'll see the series. 3D means it's in the third circuit, okay? And then you see the page numbers, the series, I should say, of the recording. This is the Fourth Circuit, and it was in 2011 when that case went about, okay? So when you see those numbers, they mean something, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I listed all those as I was listing cases that you're going to be looking at. You'll see those listed. For Michigan law, you're going to see this is the closed meeting law, and it's MCL section 15.268. The MCL stands for Michigan Compiled Laws. And the section is 15.268 of the law. The Michigan Supreme Court is listed once again, plaintiff first, defendant second. Then you get the volume. This is a Michigan Supreme Court case, so it just says Michigan, and then you see the page number and the year. And so when you see that, in a few cases, we'll have some Supreme Court cases in other states because they have some bearing on for us. Okay, so those are citations. And once again, we don't expect you to memorize any of that. We just want you to be aware of how it's done. Okay, so at this point, there's a review of the American legal system. Okay, things that you'll need to know. Once again, I'll have a few questions from Objective 1. I'll have a few questions from Objective 2, a few questions from Objective 3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I did finally figure out how to put your quiz up it'll come up on Monday from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. So I think that's the way it's going to work, and I think we'll get it done. And I also was able to figure out, so what I want you to do with and we'll be talking about it here in a minute, but the code of ethics, all I want you to do is write a paragraph or two with your feelings about code of ethics. You don't have to do any research. I just want a reaction, okay? Your reaction. So that's really all I'm looking for. And I figured out how to have you upload it. So you won't have to copy and paste. All you'll do is just upload. I think it'll work, should work. Let's put it that way. Okay, so now we're getting ready to move on to Module 2. Okay, questions about Module 1? any of those terms? Okay, we'll get into the second module, and the second module is dealing with governance, how school districts are governed. And I'll start by saying that the Michigan Constitution will identify charter schools, although you call them a different, I can't remember, I never remember what you call them, but it's called something different than charter schools. Academies, I guess, yes, it's called academies. And of course, public schools and private schools or non-public schools. And they will have in their MCL reference to those. And so you need to understand that. So when starting to think about board governance, we want you to realize that there is external governance and internal governance. Can somebody tell me the difference between those two?
The external or the internal governance, that would be the policies made by that local entity that's specific to them and how they manage risk. And
Absolutely.
then wouldn't the external governance, sorry, I'm looking at my notebook, would be like outside of the organization. So what's said by outside, like federal or
Yes.
state law.
And so, yes, with external governance, you're talking about state law, you're talking about maybe even federal law, it depends, but you're talking about laws that derive from specific law. And once again, boards cannot go against I'm always humored working with a number of boards as I have. When a board member gets voted in, they think they have all the freedom to do anything that they want. And of course, the first thing out of the gate is they want to fire the head football coach. And so consequently, we have to go through a process of explaining, no, you've got to go through some procedures in order to consider that before you actually do it. And that always is somewhat interesting. And with internal governance, I always like to with the external governance, I always like to use the firing of an individual because it's very detailed, and you're going to find when you start dealing with the staff rights, you're going to see how that even changed with a case. So with internal governance, I always like to talk about every state has citizens' participation at board meetings, and generally there's a general state law that requires public participation. However, it doesn't tell you how public participation must be done. Local boards can decide that. And some boards is a very elaborate process. You got to go to the Board of Education office 3 weeks ahead of the board meeting. You've got to give your name, you got to give your address, you got to tell what you're going to be talking about, and you're given 5 minutes at the board meeting to share whatever it is you have. On the other hand, I've seen situations where it's freewheeling, where board members allow anybody to stand up in a meeting at any point in time and raise their hand and say, hey, I don't like that. I think it should be this, or whatever. So there's the perfect example of internal governance, where the decisions rest strictly with the local Board of Education. Okay, so the second objective is to recognize the school board's mandatory or ministerial and permissive or discretionary functions. It's kind of in the same line as external and internal governance. Can someone tell me the differences between those two?
You said
The
external what? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, E.
No, I was just asking, you said external and internal what?
Yeah, okay. So we've just got done talking about external and internal board governance, okay? But now we're talking about school board's mandatory or ministerial and their permissive or discretionary functions. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ezra.
The ministerial functions are the ones that are they have to carry out without using any personal discretion. But then the permissive, that involves like them exercising their judgment.
Yes. And so once again, firing somebody they've got to do a mandatory process to fire somebody, okay? It's not discretionary. However, there are such things as, local decisions that could be permitted, okay? And so we want to make sure that you understand, because, heaven help you, if you ever get into a situation where a new board member tries to tell you that we're going to fire somebody, and you've got to stand up and say, oh, wait a minute. You can't do that. That's not in your bailiwick, so to speak. We can do it, but we got to follow these procedures, okay? The next very important for you to understand with board governance is open meetings, also called sunshine acts, as compared to or different from Freedom of Information or Public Records Act. Can someone tell me what an open meeting sunshine law means? What does that mean?
Like to be transparent?
Yes, not
And
only
then-
transparent, you have to conduct all business in the open. That's open meetings. So, and just like Ohio, Michigan has, we call them executive sessions. You guys call them a little bit something different, spatial sessions, I think it is, where you can go behind, Board of Education can go behind closed doors and they can talk about hiring people, but they can't vote in that meeting. That would be a violation of Open Meeting Act. All business has to be conducted in the sunshine, okay? And, once again, another reason to go into a special session, and in that special session is typically the superintendent and the school board members, is if you're in negotiations, you're allowed to go into executive session or special session to talk about those negotiations. Now, you can't vote on a contract. You have to come out of executive session in order to vote, but that's open meetings. That's much different than Freedom of Information or Public Records Act. What's that mean?
It provides the public the right to ask for access to records from any of the federal agencies.
Absolutely. And you hit it right on the head, which is very good. We're talking about even the federal government. If the federal government did something and you were curious about what it is they did, they too have got to abide by open meetings. And so therefore, they should provide you with that information, those records. And aspiring principals are always interested in this particular bit of this tidbit. So if you have suspended a child, you submit a letter to the parent, that could be public record. Okay. Now, if you, as a principal, want to keep a tally of misdemeanors that various students have had, as long as you don't share that with anybody else, that's called a sole possession file, and you can do that. You can keep that. That's not a public record. So with those kinds of things, you just have to realize that if there's a record request, there's a certain amount of time. Typically, there's even been a case with regard to this. I don't know if it was an Ohio case or I think it was an Ohio case, but it doesn't matter. You have to provide it in a timely fashion. And that sometimes can be interesting and be disputed. Okay, so when we get into these areas, open meetings, sunshine laws, public records, freedom of records, we then get into the 21st century, where we start talking about email, voicemail, text mail, and typically the law hasn't caught up with technology. And so I gave you a few instances, and I'm going to show you one here in a minute when we show you how to provide your scenario. We will we'll talk about one of those particular cases. where there's been decisions about text messages, are they open records? And the answer in general is if it is a public record, it is whether it's a text message or an email, you got to provide it. Okay, if it's classified as a public record. The case I'm going to show you, it wasn't determined it was a public record. And then with the open meetings, in that particular scenario, a guy got elected. He decided to talk to his 3 or 4 other board members, and they were making decisions. And guess what? They violated open records with emails. So hold on a minute, and I'll get my whiteboard back up and running here, and I'll show you that particular case. Okay, so I'm doing 2 things here. I'm first showing you how to properly post your discussion initial and reply responses. Okay, and here's the situation or the scenario. The Colorado teacher has been using the district provided cell phone for personal text messaging. His or her spouse has requested a copy of these personal messages in a formal release of open records request to you. As an open records officer, what is the legal guidance and what action do you take? So you'll refer to your particular scenario and you'll just type in legal guidance. In this particular case, there was a specific case in Colorado, Denver Publishing Company versus County Commissioners of whatever that is. And it went to the Supreme Court and was decided in 2005. And basically, as we said, it was an open records law. And although this case law would not apply in Michigan, what happens is lawyers use other states to build their case, okay? And so in this particular case, the law would not allow the release of those messages. The Supreme Court ruled that the communication was not sent in the official professional role, and the school officials, therefore, these text messages do not fall within the definition of an open record. Basically, what was going on behind the scenes is one of the spouses was having an affair, and they were using the school cell phone to illicitly communicate, and the other spouse wanted that record to prove they were having this affair. Well, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. Okay, so that's how simple it is for you to report your scenarios. Just very cleanly establish the legal guidance, and then very succinctly give me a sentence or 2 that says what you would do, okay? In accordance with the law, of course. Okay, oops there. Here's how you simply report a reply. So this Friday, which is tomorrow, by midnight, we want you to have looked at your scenario. We want you to have provided your initial post on your specific scenario. Of course, we gave you your numbers. Hopefully you remember your numbers, because I won't, but hopefully you will. And so then by Sunday, we want you to go back in and read your other 5 classmates' responses. And you'll just simply say, student 1, on target. Student 2, partially missed the target. Or in this case, student 2, that's you. So just say, this is me, so you don't have to respond. And student 3, you missed the target completely, because you missed the legal guidance should have been blah, 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 and the appropriate action should have been blah, 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 okay? And then student 3, you partially missed the target because you got the case, but you didn't provide the specific actions or something like that, okay? Do you understand how to do those?
Will we get marked down if we missed the target, but we like went through the whole process?
Well, so the answer is, it's a twofold answer. First of all, these only count 1 point, okay? So if you completely miss, but let's say that you did a good job in analyzing, you're going to get half the point. But if you miss both, you'll get 0 point. You won't get the 1 point. But once again, it's 1 point. The whole idea is for you to apply this information. You know, it's one thing to know this information. The most important thing is applying it appropriately. That's the important thing. So yeah, there's a point for each one of those. Other questions?
The sample whiteboard that you just showed, that's also like available to, I mean, that sample, where is that located?
Yeah, I think I have that. I'm pretty sure I have that
I think
someplace.
it's module 2. It says how to properly post a discussion board.
Yeah,
I believe there's an example in there. I
Yes,
remember one.
exactly. Should probably the same example, quite
I'm
frankly.
downloading it now, but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So once again, that considered two different things. It considered, number one, you saw this case, you saw how to post that, but you also got to see a 21st century governance issue, where in this case, it was dealing with text messages and whether it was public record or not. And the Supreme Court in Colorado said, no, it's not. And my guess is if that similar issue was brought to bear in Michigan, they would probably lean on the Colorado case and probably that would establish precedent. In my guess is, if there hasn't already been a case. I didn't go into that kind of detail. Okay, so we ask you to do some reading on codes of ethics and write a paragraph about what you have. And then when you have completed that, you'll upload that as part of the quiz. Okay. Questions about the second module and or the posting of the scenarios discussion?
With the code of ethics, are you referencing, like, is that something that you'll post in similar fashion to the bylaws that you posted for us to review during this module?
Yes, I posted the Michigan Educator Code of Ethics. I have that listed. And I do realize that a number of you are about halfway through the second module. And by the way, when you get done with it, please mark that you've completed it. That way I know that you've completed it. And realize that I am keeping an eye on your progress. And so, trying to help you stay on target, so to speak. So by
How
September,
do we mark that we completed it? I know once I go through it, it gives me a check mark on its own.
oh, okay. See, I didn't
So I
know.
don't know. I'm still trying to get used to the new Blackboard.
Yeah, I know. There'll be some, as we said to you early on, there'll be some things that we'll have to figure out along the way. So on September 13th, you are going to be reviewing your school board policies, and not all of them. I'm only having you look at like 10 different parts of it, because typically that board policy manual, if it's hard copy, it's probably 4 inches thick, but nowadays everybody's got it online, but still even online, it's probably 40, 50 pages, I suppose. But, I'm only looking at, I want you to look at whether or not there's statements, for example, on doing business, conducting business, open meetings. If there's a statement on public records, there should be. Now, I realize that within this group, I have a student who is, I'll ask Lenise, do you guys have a board policy manual?
You know, when you were just saying, I was just thinking, like, I'm gonna have to ask my supervisor that because we are a nonprofit
I know.
organization. I work on the early childhood side. There is a board policy meetings, and there are some parents who sit on the board
My guess
meetings.
is then, just by what you just told me, my guess is there is a policy manual, okay?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm guessing there is. I know that if you're in a public school, you have one. I know that for sure. I also know that most Catholic schools, maybe they don't call them policy manuals, they might call them bylaws, okay? Now, if you can't find it, I have in the module, I have Livonia's board policy manual, and I have a Catholic school diocese policy manual. I can't remember if it's Lansing, Diocese of Lansing, or Diocese of Detroit. I can't remember which one of the two. And so you can use those if you can't find yours. But we want you to just do a little bit of familiarizing yourself with that policy manual, because it is very important, especially if you do become an administrator. You've got to be privy to your school district's policies. There's no question. And those policies can come through the board policy manual. They can come through a faculty handbook. They can come through a student handbook. They can come through an athletic handbook. They can come through those are all legal documents, by the way. Those are all local legal documents. And so we want to make sure that you are well aware of that. So by the 13th, you need to do that review. Okay. So with that, are there any terms that you'd like for me to define for you or keep you informed about? I'm not hearing anybody. I don't know if I'm seeing head shake and I'm seeing some mouths move, but I'm not seeing anything specific. Once again,
I'm good, but we are going to be getting that recording, right? Like you usually send us
yes,
recording.
I'll be shutting this off, and within
Thank you.
by tomorrow, I'll have it posted on YouTube, and I'll give you the link and have that. That seems to work out fairly decently, and I think it also helps as another way for you to do some review. But I feel that you have a fairly good handle, particularly about the American legal system. I think you need a little bit more study on average. You need to get a little bit more study in on the governance issues. And once again, not looking for anything minor. I'm looking for the most important things. And as I say, these quizzes are covering information or questioning information that you really ought to know off the top of your head, so to speak, particularly as a school administrator and as an educator. Doesn't hurt you as well. Okay. So, once again, this is the routine, and you'll find that if you copy and paste that, spend some time looking at the objectives, identifying what those are, and crossing off the terms you already know, and I'm sure there are some that you already know, and then be on the lookout for the terms that you don't know, and kind of going from there. Okay, so are we all set with the assignments we got to do?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. With that, by George, 1 hour. That's what I try to stick to.
Okay.
That's why I operate off of a guide. And also it helps me remember some of the, and understand that I realize that this stuff it'll get deeper. I mean, there's one particular module, can't remember which one it is. There's like 20 different cases. I think it's students, but I'm not student rights. They're like 20 different cases. And you're going, oh my gosh, but once again, we're trying to hit on the most important ones. And as I mentioned to you, the text, he gets just too deep into the weeds, I think, on some situations. We're trying to look at, you're going to find out, we're looking at cases that are landmark cases, cases that change the way we do things and the way we'll continue to do things in some instances until this question again. With that, Have a good evening. Question, let me,
Yeah, I do. I sent you a message. I don't know. I didn't want to hold up anybody else. You guys probably maybe have already seen it. But when I was going through the modules, that one part where it says, like, after you read everything, then answer the questions and post it to the activities. Maybe I need to share my screen to like, well, let me put this down because I'm going through the modules and sometimes it's still like hard for it to be like that I've done the modules or that it's checked, but I think it's in.
one of the things that I changed, I think it was E or Nawal sent me a message and they were trying to get into the discussion. And I went back and I said, oh my gosh, they had forced choice or forced something, meaning that you had to go through everything before you could get to the next one. And I said, oh, you know, although I'd like for you to go through it because I have those listed. There's a reason that I have things listed the way I have them. But, you know, I don't want to hang somebody up because they missed a specific activity, for example. So I changed that. So now you can, you could march around a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
So
But
you know, this must be something that's new with the new addition, and I'm not familiar with it.
so in module 2, school governance, ethics in schools, overview week of, let's be like September 2nd, when you go all the way down to the bottom, it
Yeah.
says activities and assignments, 61 minutes total. After complete the readings, go to the activities section and complete the activities and assignments for this module. Are you just saying
Oh, okay.
reading through, or like what I need?
So the way that they had this set up was you start off with just a topic sent, a paragraph, just to introduce you to the topic, okay? And then we give you an overview. And in that overview, it tells you the topic again, it tells you the objectives, it tells you the terms for that particular module. And then it gets into, you know, talks about activities and those kind of things. So from there, you then click on the activities. And what's interesting is that for this one, and I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on the construction of this class, because what I have learned now is I could have put each one of those, you know, what I did was I took the activity, I took one sheet, if you will, and I gave you all of the videos, for example, I wanted you to watch, told you how long they were going to be, et cetera, and put them on one sheet. What I've now discovered is that I could have had you click on each one of those individually. So I'll be interested to see how you feel about that. But in answering your question, Lenise, after you get through that objective, or excuse me, after you get through that overview, you then got to go to the activities. And
That's why I need to understand, where are the activities?
the activities, you click on, it'll say activities. There's a button that says activities.
I was having the same problem. I couldn't find them and I thought I was missing something, or I thought it was a discussion board, but I couldn't find the activities myself.
Okay,
Right.
let me see if I can, let me see how this works.
So I assumed it was just a discussion board and a quiz,
Correct.
because I looked everywhere and I couldn't get them.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull this up. Well, what I'm going to do is I'll take a screenshot of it and I'll point to where you should be going to get those activities. Okay. And I'll send that to you in an email. But so after the objective, there's another link. And in that link, it has all of and it says activities, modular 1, module 2 activities. And in that, we'll have all the videos, all of the websites, all the PDF that you need for that module. Okay. And from my view, when I hit tracking, I see that you've started that. So I always just thought, well, it's being properly done. But I'll send you a screenshot to help you work through that. These are some of the growing
So-
pains that we have with.
For this week, so we have the quiz, we have the discussion board, and we have activities.
So, the way this ought to work is on a Monday, the modular opens up for you. And now you have open modules 1, 2, and 3. And so when you get to module 2, for example, you click on it and you'll read the paragraph giving you what the overall topic is. Then you click on the overview, and the overview just gives you the objectives, and it gives you the terms, and it will tell you how many minutes the activities are. And then there's a link underneath that, objectives, and that link you click on, and that will open up, and you will then work through each one of the different kinds of videos, etc., that you are to look at. Once again, I'll send you a screenshot showing you where that's at, and then I'll show you when it's open, what it looks like for module 2 particularly. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
We'll get these are all these clunky things that we'll get figured out with Blackboard Ultra.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see you later. Have a good evening.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.